Hey everybody, JD here. With the 2019 NFL season just a week and 2 days away, I wanted to do a quick little video recapping a couple of things that I learned last year. For those of you who aren't familiar with who I am, I started a Twitter handle last year called @GamblingSherpa. A little context: I've been betting on football for quite a few years since I was a young adult. So last year I thought I'd try something different and start publishing my picks to Twitter, and frankly I had a lot of fun with it. So with that, I wanted to highlight a couple things that I learned during my season on Twitter last year, which was pretty interesting because what posting my picks to Twitter did was it actually gave me an opportunity at the end of the year to do a bit of a post-mortem and to learn about some things that I was maybe doing right and some things that I was maybe not doing right. And I'm not going to talk about all of them in this video. I'm just going to talk about what to me are the two largest things that I learned. One is good, one is bad. But I'll maybe do a few more videos later on here in the preseason or maybe even into the season, just kind of talking about some other things as well. So quick context for you. One thing is I only bet the NFL. I don't bet any college football, no college or professional basketball or anything else. To me, the NFL is the only sport and the only league that I understand well enough that I'm willing to put my hard-earned dollars on the line. And even more specifically than that, I only bet games against the spread. I don't do over-unders. I don't do any teasers or parlays or anything like that. I simply just pick games against the spread. And I typically do anywhere from 5 to 7 games each week in the NFL, depending how I'm feeling about that week's slate. So with that context, here we go. So here's how I did. You can see overall I netted out at plus 12.1 units, which for me, that's a successful season. I consider any season where I finish in the black to be a successful season. I usually consider a stretch goal for me, like my everything went perfect, to be a 25 unit profit during the season. So I got a little under halfway there last year, so I was pretty happy with it. And one thing you'll note, just kind of look at this, it wasn't a smooth ride. You can kind of see I really had a strong start to the season, and after 7 weeks, I was sitting around plus 15 units and feeling pretty good about myself. But then look at this. The next 2 weeks, weeks 8 and 9, I gave back all my winnings from the previous 7 weeks and then some, and I was sitting in the red. And really, from weeks 9 through 14, I was in the red the majority of that time. Just barely got my head above water a little bit here during week 11. But what I did, fortunately, was, and I'll talk about this a little bit, is I didn't get reckless with the amounts that I was betting. I didn't start chasing my losses. I didn't let my losses throw me. And you can see I regained my footing here starting around week 14, and I finished the season pretty strong. I actually peaked here during divisional playoff week where I was at 17.6 units before giving back another 5.5 to finish the year. And so part of the reason I think I was able to weather this storm, because trust me, this wasn't a lot of fun, was because I'd made a determination ahead of the season, which I've done this every year, by the way, for the past number of years. I just started tracking it last year. But I made a determination ahead of the season that I was only going to bet one of 3 different amounts on every single game. Essentially, what I do is I determine how much for me is a unit that I'm willing to bet, and then on every single game, I only bet 1 unit, 2 units, or 3 units on games that I bet. So for me, it doesn't matter how much I love the game, how convicted I am that the team I'm betting on is going to cover. The most I will bet on that game is 3 units. And I feel like that's important because what that does is that sets a cap on the amount of money that I could potentially lose. And so what that keeps me from doing is 2 things. Number one, it keeps me from doing the thing that every seasoned gambler will tell you not to do, which is chasing my losses. That's really where you hear the darkest and deepest horror stories of people who get into gambling and then they end up completely ruining their finances. It almost always becomes they had a bad week, they lost some money, and then on the Sunday night football game or the Monday night football game, or if you're betting college, the Hawaii games, the Hawaii home games are famous for this. people try to double up and try to get all of their losses back on one game. And then what ends up happening is they end up doubling their losses and then some, because you figure in the VIG and everything else, and it gets into a really ugly situation. So when you set these amounts, you can kind of see how I do it here. This is how I posted it every single week. For me, essentially, if it was a 3-star game, that meant I was betting 3 units on it. 2-star game was I was betting 2 units, and then obviously 1 star was 1 unit. And I consistently stuck to those amounts all season long. And what that allowed me to do is that allowed me to play for the long term. So that's probably the number one piece of advice I would give people if you're betting on football, is that in order to stay it for the long term, you need to have a maximum amount that you're willing to bet. And that amount needs to be a very small percentage of what your overall betting pot or betting funds are for the season. And I'll do another video where I get into how I determine my unit amounts, but for me, roughly, I keep 1 unit as equal to 2% of my overall funds, and I build it out from there. So that's the first thing that I learned. And again, you can see how this worked for me, because once again, it really helped me to weather the storm down here. So that was my positive lesson that I noticed from doing my post-mortem after the season. There was also a negative thing that I learned as well too, and I'll show you this right here. I had a really good season betting on all the games, but what's interesting is before the season, I bet on a whole bunch of NFL team win totals as well. And to give you a little context, I started this Twitter handle in June of 2018. I was really excited about it. I was studying team win totals throughout the entire offseason. And so going into the season, I felt like I had a really firm grasp on how I thought some of these teams were going to do. And what I ended up doing, which I'm not really proud of, is I bet 8 different NFL team win totals. And spoiler alert, it didn't go well. You can kind of see here, I mapped this out. After we reconciled those with the book at the end of the year, you can see I lost 6.9 units on those 8 bets, and I more than cut my season winnings in half. Look at this. I took myself from 12.1 in profit on the season down to 5.2. And just look at this dip here. It still pains me to look at this. It's so frustrating. But take a look here. These are the bets that I did. And, and going in, I put 3 units on the Cleveland under. Of course, that didn't hit because Baker Mayfield got hot. I put 2 units on the Houston under. They started off 0-4, and I thought I was golden. That ended up not hitting either. Same for Detroit. I think week 2 or week 3, they had a big Sunday night win over the Patriots, and I thought I was going to hit my Detroit over. That didn't hit. And then down here, my 1-unit bets, I bet the Indianapolis under. That didn't hit. I bet the Chicago under. That didn't hit. They both had great seasons. Fortunately, these 3 hit. But my big learning there was, and just looking at it, it's really crazy. Like during the season, when I really have my finger on the pulse of how the season's going and how these teams are doing, I usually bet on somewhere between 5 to 7 games. And 7 feels like a stretch for me. I'm actually more comfortable doing 5. Usually end up talking myself into 6. But that was when I was in the moment and I really had my finger on the pulse of how all of these teams were doing. So how crazy was it for me to think that I could place 8 different bets with any sort of expectation of thinking I was going to know how all of these teams are going to do over a 17-game season? Like, I didn't know. And again, it ate away at my profits. It took me down to 5, it took away 6.9 units on the season. So I'm going to do a couple of team win totals this year, and I'll publish those. I think after seeing these results, I'll publish them so you guys can fade my bets if you want. But my learning there is I'm going to do probably 1 or 2 NFL team win totals at the most, and they're probably going to be 1 unit each. And so I'll put that money out there because I have a couple that I feel good about and I have fun doing it, but I'm not going to do it as aggressively as I did last year because it really ate into my profits. Okay, that's it for today. Hope everyone's enjoying the preseason and look forward to the regular season starting again in next week.